Welcome everybody to today's episode of the Conscious Grief series. I am very happy to be here with Cheryl Fidelman. Cheryl is a trauma and codependence coach, and she deals with codependence recovery through the lens of trauma healing. And Cheryl and I have known one another for, I don't know how many years now, but Cheryl has been my coach for maybe coming up to 10 years, something like that.
Something like that, like
yeah.
8.
So Cheryl's based in Los Angeles, California. That's where we actually met on the beach, a very serendipitous moment. And yes, I have many things to be very grateful for with working with Cheryl. So thank you very much for being here.
Oh, I love it. I'm so psyched. I'm so psyched for you and psyched for this conversation. Proud of you. Yeah.
Thank you, Cheryl. Well, the first question I like to ask everybody is, what is your definition of grief?
I would say any kind of loss that has impacted the way we view ourselves, the way that we view others, and ultimately, potentially, the way we deal with life itself. There's something about grief that I think that has us go, hey, life, just the existential, spiritual, non-physical realm, what is happening here? So it's almost like this powerlessness of unanswerable questions, of loss, of where do I put this feeling of I can't quite make sense of what just happened in life that I had no control over. That might be a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think it's any reaction to a loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, any reaction to a loss. I mean, we're going to talk today about grief and codependency. Codependency is something that we experience through relationship. And maybe it'd be helpful to begin with by defining codependency, because we hear the term a lot, but it would be great to hear your interpretation of that.
Yeah, so I have what I call my 3 tenets of codependence, which are the want to be wanted, the need to be needed, and or the need to prove oneself. So in relationship with another person, and also most importantly, our relationship with ourselves, when we're caught in any one or more of those 3 areas, like we're contorting ourselves because we want to be wanted, we want to maintain desire. We want to be needed by somebody else. We want to maintain the bond and find our identity with another person needing us. Also, when we get hooked into some sort of proving ourselves, proving we're good, proving we're right, proving that what we're providing is the thing that the other person needs. We're proving our validity as a human being. We're proving where we came from and where our point of view comes from and why we did what we did. So anytime we're hooked into proving, we're also hooked into codependent behavior. And really, if we really distill it down, codependence is not knowing where somebody else begins and ends and we begin and end. There's like an enmeshment. And when we start to move into codependence recovery, we start to have dissonance, meaning space between us and another person. There's a beginning and an end to me, and there's a beginning and end to you. So there's no illusion of self. I become a full person and you're a full person. And my existence doesn't depend on how much you need or want from me.
Mm-hmm. Because why is it that codependency can be a negative thing? Because some people might listen to that and think, well, yeah, that's what a relationship is. You enmesh with somebody else. But why does that start to become a challenge?
So the way that I look at codependence is that we demonstrate our unhealed trauma through codependence. So we hook into another person because we don't want to be abandoned. We hooked into another person because it's an illusion of feeling safe, because it gives us some sort of value. So it's an interesting question, because I think for most codependents, and myself included, I'm further along in my codependence recovery than I ever have been, and there's more for me to go. We don't know what a healthy level of depending on another person is. Aren't I supposed to depend on somebody? Isn't this person supposed to provide XYZ for me? And then we have all of these expectations and fallen expectations because we're putting our survival on another person. And there is, I think, a healthy level of codependence when we start to heal our trauma, meaning we don't put our feeling of fulfillment and safety into another person's hands.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's about
then you go, yeah, it's healthy to depend on them to pay the cable bill when they say they're going to pay the cable bill, right? I'm not paying the cable bill. It's not my responsibility. It's theirs. I depend on them for that. So there's healthy levels of dependence for sure.
Yeah, thank you for making that clear for everybody, because yeah, I think we hear the term, but we don't always fully understand it. And I'm really interested in the work that you do as a trauma healer and working with codependent patterns. You know, what kinds of grief do you mainly identify in your work, would you say, through working with people with this trauma and codependency patterns?
I was really excited about this interview, and I've been thinking about this a lot. And because I don't think I've in it, because I put out a lot of videos, and I don't think in any of my videos and content have I really said this theory that I have, which is that I think that most codependent behavior is a result of unprocessed grief.
Right.
And so I'll say a little bit more about that, which is that when we have a fear of abandonment, okay, when we latch onto somebody else just because we don't want to let go, because we don't want to feel the feeling of being left out or marginalized, we don't want to feel the feeling of being alone. And I don't just mean like letting go of a relationship and leaving a relationship. I mean, even in like micro moments where we don't want to let go of a conversation until we feel like the other person has heard us, right? We're in like a stronghold moment. And when we go from like micro codependent moments to macro codependent moments, meaning like you're fully in a dysfunctional relationship and you want to remain in the illusion of that, I think those are all products of unhealed grief. So you were abandoned as a child, your mother or father left, okay? Or you were bullied. And your identity and your existence was invalidated on a constant basis. Because I look at trauma, unhealed trauma, as either one traumatic event or a series of traumatic events.
Yeah.
And sometimes we hear trauma, we think car accident, we think rape, or something big and obvious. And of course it includes that. But sometimes people go, I never really had this big traumatic event. And you might not have had one, but you might have had a series of covert traumatic experiences. For example, I was bullied like subtly over time, which had me be like terrified of people and think that I was inferior and think that people hated me. And so when I moved into adult life and I had this complex, that just immediate complex that people hated me and that I was inferior, I think that is unhealed and unidentified grief from being bullied. So when I faced the impact of the bullying, the pain that instilled in my system, when I faced the anger that I had around it and the denial, then my complex of feeling hated and inferior diminished.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or when we try to hold on to relationships because we think I can't survive without that person, I don't want to be abandoned. Potentially you haven't faced the abandonment that you had when you were a child. When you face it and you process it, you're not so afraid of being abandoned anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You're not, you go, I can actually handle being alone. I can handle the disconnect in this moment, in this conversation.
Everyone who's sort of seeking healing, if you like, because they didn't have the stable childhood, so to say, in a sense, you know, we have so many different ways of categorizing what our issues could be. But I guess in a way, it is like you're saying, that there was some sort of safety, some kind of lacking of safety or love. And then ultimately that is a grief, you know, that you're trying to reconcile somehow throughout your life. And then until you get more conscious, if you like, then and more perspective on the past, more ability you have to heal. And we're carrying around all this sadness that we're not always aware of, you know, which is grief.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it, because early on in one's codependent recovery path, feelings are also kind of an illusion.
Right.
Feeling sad, feeling angry. How does one feel angry? How does one express anger? How does one allow somebody else to express anger without me being totally terrified by it? How does one really just be sad? And I think that when we're codependent, we get hooked into wanting to be wanted, needing to be needed, or needing to prove ourselves. We get hooked into these behaviors, but what's really underneath it is just sadness and heartbreak from our past, from the current moment. And so, yeah, just a lot of unhealed, unprocessed, unrecognized sadness and anger. And especially when we've had some level of dysfunction in our childhood, sometimes we saw displays of anger that were scary. Right. And so it had us go, anger's no good. Yeah. Anger destroys. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have a healthy way of managing or demonstrating or cycling through these kinds of feelings of anger and heartbreak. And it's another reason why people will stay in an unhealthy situation, because they don't want to feel anything bad.
Yeah.
If I disconnect, if I break up, if I leave, if I change this somehow, if I speak up, there's going to be bad things to be felt.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's so key. So it's like there's that part that you don't, and it, you know, another part of it is you know, the people pleasing and the morphing into somebody else's world to make everybody else happy. And I think this, what you were saying about the feelings, is so key here, because we can be so disconnected from our feelings through trauma. You know, we shut down certain parts of ourselves in order to not feel, because that's what we feel is made safety for us. So then we numb certain parts of ourselves, and we're unable to really fully feel and experience things. So then we're not really able to lean into the grief and fully heal until we're ready.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to say it. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think that should we examine our unhealed trauma, we'll find that trauma is really, really, really important, because I think that life is a process of overcoming.
Right.
And if we were never traumatized in any way, we don't have anything to overcome.
Right.
If we were never traumatized in any way, we won't have the opportunity to evolve and transform, should we choose to.
Mm-hmm.
Should we choose to uncover, so, trauma the way I say it is that it's a decision that your nervous system made at any point in time to keep you safe. Of course, the ages 0 to 8 are some of the most important decision making time for your nervous system, because those decisions will remain for the rest of your life should they go unexamined.
Mm-hmm.
But something shocking happens and we go, I have to make it look like that didn't hurt. I have to figure out how to survive this situation. And most of that survival is ignoring the actual impact of the situation. So then we grow up, and whatever real feelings we had in response to the traumatic event, we lose capability of. So we lose our ability to know what's a real threat or a perceived threat. Is there something really to be afraid of here, or am I just triggered from a whole bunch of unhealed stuff? But it also, unhealed trauma makes, or trauma gives us some of the most interesting, quirky things about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives us, if you want to shift and transform, and there's some version of yourself that is possible, that you're just not quite in the ultimate version of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
look at your trauma, go through the fire and the depth of healing that trauma, and you will meet that version of yourself that's in there.
Mm-hmm.
So trauma healing is I think one of life's greatest gifts, should we choose to give it to ourselves.
Yeah. And people who may feel like they haven't had a big trauma, so to say, but as you were saying, everybody has had some trauma, haven't they? Even being in the womb, sometimes we're experiencing trauma, or through being born, or so sometimes people may have to sort of like go further back to really discover what the trauma could be. It may not be so obvious, for example.
Yeah, that's a good point. In utero, and I also thoroughly believe in inherited trauma. So we may have some behaviors that are holding us back, and we go, I have no memory of why this behavior should even be in my system. And we don't have to have the memory of everything that birthed that behavior, because I think that we have inherited the psychology, all the way back in our heritage. Maternal side, paternal side. I mean, we have behaviors that we came in with. Right. And so one might not be able to point to a trauma, but if there's a behavior where you go, this behavior that I'm having, or this way of thinking is blocking my potential.
Yeah.
Then you can still work through it and get to the other side of it with or without a memory attached to it.
And when we start to become more aware of these sort of identities, if you like, that we've taken on, and then we want to sort of deconstruct them, or think like, oh my God, I've just been wandering around for the last, however many years, operating on this level, and there's some sort of grief in identity there as well, I think.
Yes. I call that codependent grief, or a codependent hangover.
Right.
Because when you start to become more awake to certain things, and you start to go, I cannot believe the behavior I had when I was less awake.
Yeah.
First of all, what a fool, what an idiot. Second of all, I wasted time being in such a more narrow frame of awareness. And that's a real thing that I see a lot of my clients go through, because I have a 6-month program that's it's like an expedited codependence recovery program. And people go, oh my God, like, can I get that time back? I just didn't know. I just didn't know any better. Or they're in a marriage for 20 years and they didn't even realize the mind frame that they were in.
Yeah, I can see how that would, like the shoulda, woulda, coulda stuff that happens when somebody dies, it's the same in an identity of waking up.
Yeah. And one of the things that of the many things that I like to work on to address that is to be in a state of self-apology.
Right.
Because it's easy to go, I can't believe I spent X amount of years with that person and let them treat me that way.
Mm-hmm.
But if we take it as that we're the source of our life and we go, actually, I'm sorry I did that to myself. I'm sorry, self, that I put you through that for 5 years or a year or a month or 10 years or 20 years. I am sorry to myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the compassionate self-forgiveness is a really key part of healing that. And I guess what you were saying earlier, it's like, yeah, okay, sometimes you think, I get it, I had to have the traumatic situation, but did I have to let it go on for that long? But, I guess our consciousness is ready to deal with things when it's ready. And that's part of accepting that was when we were ready for the transformation and trying to not wish it was different.
Yeah, and I also want to add that trauma doesn't just give us our more shut down or closed off or protective or bad or negative traits. Trauma can give us great traits as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like if there were moments in one's childhood where there was a lot of room for them to play and be excited and express themselves and joke around, that I call is a trauma as well. It's a decision that your nervous system made in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of look at trauma as a spectrum. It's not just what happened to you that gave you the shitty parts of your life. Okay. Sorry, I don't know if this is a cursing.
Oh, that's absolutely no problem.
But traumas create our identity over time.
Mm-hmm.
It creates the wonderful things about you and the fun things about you and the things that help have your life be working.
Right.
And it creates what might be stunting your natural evolution.
Thank you for that. Would you say that there are sort of similar parallels to the gifts of grief, if you like? To the gifts of trauma?
Yeah. I'm getting a little moved right now because, my father died, I think 17 years ago already or something like that. And it's constantly teaching me things. Constantly teaching me about life. Because for so long I was like, this is not how it should have gone. It's just not how it should. This was a mistake.
Yeah.
And I think that when it comes to childhood trauma, whether it's a death or some other kind of trauma, for so long we go, this is not how it should have went.
Mm-hmm.
It just should not have gone that way. Life should have gone some other way. There was some mistake in the working somehow. And if we look at it, all has gone the way it should have gone. There were no mistakes. You're not screwed.
Yeah.
Right? Because some people, I have clients in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. I don't have anybody in their 70s right now. And no matter where they are in life, no matter what age they are, they'll go, I'm screwed. I don't have any time left. I screwed it all up. You're 28, you're 38, you're 48, 58. I screwed it all up. I don't have any more time left. Some mistake I made fundamentally messed up the trajectory of my life. And it just can't be true. But I think it's how we relate to, it's how we fundamentally relate to existing.
Right.
So I don't know if that really answers the question, but.
Well, yeah, I think you're saying, it gives you a much deeper experience of life if you're willing to be taught by it, I guess.
Yeah. And like when I got to the point with grieving my father's death, of acceptance, right, which is like the final stage, I believe. Okay, I accept this. If this is how it should have gone, people's parents die, people die. If this is how it should have gone, then, what's up with that? Why?
Yeah.
What is it I'm supposed to notice about life now, having accepted that this is reality? And I think that is also really important for my healing, because I never knew what was real. Like I mentioned in the past, everything was like some illusion.
Right.
So it really has me relate to reality like in a totally different way, which is very, very sobering.
Yeah. Well, that kind of leads perfectly to the final question, which is, what do you kind of conceive conscious grief to be?
I think that conscious grief is an awareness of what you're grieving, why you're grieving it, what it feels like. It's allowing all the feelings, all the sensations, all the thoughts, all the questions, all the little places in yourself that you feel are dangerous to go. So it's conscious grief is not like, it doesn't take away grief. I think it may even magnify the grief process. And it's allowing yourself to feel all of those feelings and say, I'm grieving. Because I think, and it also puts it in a context. I think when we don't want to face certain feelings, it's because we think, well, I don't know what I would do with that feeling, or how uncontrollable it's going to be, or if it's going to suck me into some vortex that I'm not going to be able to get out of. But if you put it in the context of grieving, you can say, this is why this is happening.
And identify it and understand it.
Yeah, identify it and understand it if you need to identify it and understand it. I really am a big proponent of, feel what there is to feel and don't even think about it. The slogan of my work is feeling without thinking. So feel the thing and don't have any thought, don't make it mean anything, don't define it. But in this case, I think it could be really important and healthy to tell yourself you're grieving and allow yourself to grieve, even if it's something that happened 30 years ago. Because a lot of people go, listen, we're on this time continuum. I mean, that was 20 years ago. Let's just leave it, right? But if you leave it, it will be subtly impacting your life in a way that you can't see. But your intuition will go, I just can't do this thing. I just can't say this thing. I just can't have the job or relationship I want. I don't know why. It's because there are things in your system that you haven't looked at.
100%. Thank you, Cheryl. I think that is perfect place to wrap up. I really could talk for so much longer. We've run over time, but before we close, if you want to explore more of Cheryl's work, which I highly recommend, Cheryl, tell the audience what giveaway you have.
Yeah, so I have a summit coming up. It's perfect timing for when this one's coming out. It's called the ConsciousCodependentSeries.com. theconsciouscodependencyseries.com. And that particular series is focused on my 7 distinctions that I have around listening. Mm-hmm. I'm really, really passionate right now about putting listening trainings out there to humanity, because I feel like we weren't trained how to listen. And the way, the filters through which we listen, I think, shape our entire world. So the ConsciousCodependentSeries.com. And I'm also going to give Tara my calendar link, because I want to give I want to give your viewers a free session. Wow. Free codependence recovery session. So if you want a free session, go ahead and book it.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's so generous. And I highly recommend taking Cheryl up on that, seriously. So we'll have all the details on this page, and feel free to message me personally about that. Thank you once again, Cheryl. It's just been so wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you. I love you. See you soon.
Thank you.
Everybody, bye. Happy healing.